The book of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah chapter 32, verses 23 to 26. And the word of Yahuwah came to Yirmiyahu, saying, Have ye not observed what these people have spoken, saying, The two clans which Yahuwah has chosen have been rejected by him. So they have despised my people, no more to be a nation before them. Thus said Yahuwah, If my covenant is not with day and night, and if I had not appointed the laws of the heavens and the earth, then I would also reject the descendants of Jacob and David, my servant, so that I should not take of his descendants to be rulers over the descendants of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Jacob. For I shall turn back their captivity and have compassion on them. The Torah is more than just a book written by men. There is evidence that indicates that it is exactly what it claims to be, the written word of the eternal, living Elohim, Yahuwah. This evidence shows that the Torah contains knowledge that transcends the confines of space and time, which is now being confirmed by historical records and scientific discoveries. This video will focus on the scripture found in the books of Yoel, Devarim, and Bereshit, and will provide historical evidence proving the prophecies contained within those books to be true. These prophecies concern the fall and enslavement of the Israelites, and specifically names those involved, the scattering and method of transportation, and the duration of the captivity. These prophecies are not vague, they are precise. So precise that it is statistically impossible for any group of people other than the true Israelites to match all points contained in the criteria. Tehillim, Psalms, chapter 83, verses 1 through 8. O Elohim, do not remain silent and do not be speechless, and do not be still, O El. For look, your enemies make an uproar, and those hating you have lifted up their head. They craftily plot against your people, and conspire against your treasured ones. They have said, Come and let us wipe them out as a nation, and let the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they conspired together with one heart. They have made a covenant against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tsor. Asher has also joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot, Selah. The nation of Israel has a long, intimate history and connection to the continent of Africa, growing from 70 people to an entire nation in Egypt. Even the land of Canaan, which is now the modern-day country that blasphemously calls itself Israel, is attached to the African tectonic plate and was considered to be Northeast Africa from ancient times. Even the language Hebrew is an Afro-Asiatic language. During periods of famine or invasion, Israelites would often seek refuge by traveling deeper into the continent of Africa. There were colonies of Yahudim in Cyrene and Alexandria since ancient times, and their culture had also spread into Ethiopia. Under the Greek invasion and occupation, hundreds of thousands of Yahudim were relocated to Egypt. This was their normal mode of operation and pattern of habit whenever facing stressors or foreign invaders. The book of Yoel contains the first prophecy that we will examine. It concerns the Israelites, the people of Tsor, Sidon, and Philistia, and the children of Yawan. During the breakdown, I will provide historical evidence that shows that this prophecy was concerning the transatlantic slave trade. The sub-Saharan Africans, those called Negroes, being the descendants of the ancient Israelites, the people of Tsor, Sidon, and Philistia being the people called Moors and Berbers, and the children of Yawan representing the Europeans on the opposite side of the Mediterranean Sea. The Book of Yoel, Joel, chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. For look, in those days and at that time, when I turn back the captivity of Yehuda and Jerusalem, then I shall gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. And there I shall enter into judgment with them, there for my people, my inheritance, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and have divided up my land. And they have cast lots for my people, and have given a young man for a whore, and sold a girl for wine and drank it. And also, what are you to me, O Tsor and Sidon, and all the coast of Philistia? Are you repaying me? And if you are repaying me, I would swiftly and speedily return your reward on your own head. For you have taken my silver and my gold, and brought my treasures into your temples. And the people of Yehuda and the people of Jerusalem you have sold to the sons of Yawan, to remove them far from their borders. See, I am stirring them up out of the place to which you have sold them, and I shall return on your own head what you have done, and sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the people of Yehuda, and they shall sell them to the Shebaites, to a nation far off, for Yahuwah has spoken. The Canaanites were called by many names throughout the course of history. The Greeks referred to them as Phoenicians, and the Romans called them Punics, as in the Punic Wars fought between the Carthaginians and the Romans. Hannibal Barca being the general during the Second Punic War, who marched his army along with war elephants over the Pyrenees and Alps for a direct attack on the Roman Republic. Sidon, along with Tsor, were the most powerful city-states of ancient Canaan. It was the people of Tsor who founded Carthage. Tsor was also the birthplace of Queen Alicia, also known as Queen Dido, and also the birthplace of the mythical Europa. During the Arab invasion of North Africa, Canaanite, Egyptian, and Footite tribes were converted to Islam and were collectively called Moors. On page 102 of Mungo Park's Travels in the Interior of Africa, he writes, before the Arabian conquest about the middle of the 7th century, all the inhabitants of Africa, whether they were descendants from Numidians, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Romans, Vandals, or Goths, were comprehended under the general name of Morai, or Moors. All these nations were converted to the religion of Muhammad during the Arabian Empire under the caliphs. On page 187 of Joseph J. Williams' Hebrewisms of West Africa, he writes, Sir Harry Johnson is of the opinion that the Phoenicians were a Semite tribe, closely allied to Hebrew stock, which originated in the vicinity of the Persian Gulf and spread across Arabia to the Syrian coast, halting traditionally for some time on the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. Their headquarters were at Tyre and Sidon. The Greeks called them Phoenici, and the Romans called them Phoni or Punici. The Greek word means the red people. Their own name seems to have been Cana or Canaan. On page 193 of Williams' book, Hebrewisms of West Africa, he writes, the Carthaginians, from whom it comes, were an offshoot of the Phoenicians, who were in turn descended from the Canaanites. On page 217 of Williams' Hebrewisms of West Africa, he writes, incidentally, he quoted a Latin document, apparently written at Tamentit, the old capital of Tuat, in 1447 by Anthony Malfont, who speaks of a large number of Jews at Tuat and refers to the Turigs as Philistine, and represents them as the greatest enemies of the Jews. On page 943 of the New Complete Works of Josephus, it reads, "Therein was recorded that the temple was built by King Solomon at Jerusalem 143 years and 8 months before the Tyrians built Carthage." On page 944 it reads, "Pygmalion succeeded him. He lived 56 years and reigned 47 years. Now in the 7th year of his reign, his sister fled away from him and built the city of Carthage in Libya." In Procopius's History of the Wars, pages 287 to 291, it reads, "And now since the narration of history has brought me to this point, it is necessary to tell from the beginning whence the nation of the Moors came to Libya and how they settled there. When the Hebrews had withdrawn from Egypt and had come near the boundaries of Palestine, Moses, a wise man who was their leader on the journey, died, and the leadership was passed on to Joshua, the son of Nun, who led his people into Palestine and by displaying a valor in war greater than that natural to a man, gained possession of the land. And after overthrowing all the nations, he easily won the cities, and he seemed to be altogether invincible. Now at that time the whole country along the sea from Sidon as far as the boundaries of Egypt was called Phoenicia, and one king in ancient times held sway over it, as it is agreed by all those who have written the earliest accounts of the Phoenicians. In that country there dwelt various populous tribes, the Girgasites and the Jebusites, and some others with other names by which they are called in the history of the Hebrews. Now when these nations saw that the invading general was an irresistible prodigy, they immigrated from their ancestral homes and made their way to Egypt, which adjoined their country. And finding there no place sufficient for them to dwell in, since there has been a great population in Egypt from ancient times, they proceeded to Libya. And they established numerous cities and took possession of the whole of Libya as far as the Pillars of Hercules. And there they lived even up to my time, using the Phoenician tongue. They also built a fortress in Numidia, where now is the city called Tegesi. In that place are 2 columns made of white stone near by the great spring, having Phoenician letters cut into them, which say in the Phoenician tongue, 'We are they who fled from before the face of Joshua the robber, the son of Nun.' There were also other nations settled in Libya before the Moors, who on account of having been established there from of old were said to be children of the soil. And because of this, they said that Antaeus, their king, who wrestled with Hercules and Calliope, was a son of the earth. And in latter times, those who removed from Phoenicia with Dido came to the inhabitants of Libya as kinsmen, and they willingly allowed them to found and hold Carthage. But as time went on, Carthage became a powerful and populous city, and a battle took place between them and their neighbors, who, as has been said, had come from Palestine before them and are called Moors at the present time. And the Carthaginians defeated them and compelled them to live a very great distance away from Carthage. Later on, the Romans gained the supremacy over all of them in war, and settled the Moors at the extremity of the inhabited land of Libya, and made the Carthaginians and the other Libyans subject and tributary to themselves. And after this, the Moors won many victories over the Vandals and gained possession of the land now called Mauritania, extending from Gadira as far as the boundaries of Caesarea, as well as most of Libya which remained. Such then is the story of the settlement of the Moors in Libya. On page 337 of Nahum Schultz's travels in North Africa. He writes, "There is an old Hebrew tradition that at the time of the conquest of the Holy Land by the Israelites under Joshua the son of Nun, certain Canaanite tribes migrated to Africa. One Tosefta, quoting an older source, said that when Joshua approached Canaan, he told the inhabitants that three courses were open to them. They could either leave the country, or they could sue for peace, or they could declare war against him. The Girgashites, among others, preferred to withdraw into Africa. The Tosefta goes on to say that the Amorites, the Cadmoni, the Kenites, and the Kizanites, some of whom figure among the founders of Carthage, also went to Africa. These traditions date from a period when communication between Africa and Phoenicia was continuous. The proper names of Girgash and Kenaz are often to be met with in Carthaginian inscriptions. It's important to understand that those people who are called by the umbrella term Moor originally came from ancient Canaan, before immigrating into the northwestern parts of the continent of Africa. These Moors were made up of primarily Canaanite tribes, but also included the Philistia, Footite, and Arab tribes. According to Dr. Windsor in his book From Babylon to Timbuktu, the Footites had spread from Puntland in modern-day Somalia throughout North, West, and Central Africa, often naming places where they had settled after themselves, such as Futajalon, Futatoro, Futabandu. They were instrumental in spreading Islam throughout Africa, often by means of force. In Nathan Ashabel's The Pictorial History of the Jewish People, on page 224, he records that in the interior of Africa, the Jews were hardly distinguishable from the Moors. However, we know that the Moors saw themselves as being of different national and ethnic origins than the so-called Negroes whom they sold into slavery. This has been recorded in several places. In Zondervan's Pictorial Biblical Dictionary, the Negroes are excluded from the descendants of Ham, even though they share a similar phenotype. In Ivan van Sertima's Golden Age of the Moor, he writes that the rulers of the Sudan saw themselves as possessing ethnicities different from the black people whom they sold. And while at the same time marrying their daughters off to European slaves, they considered marriage to a man of the Sudan, slave or free, denigrating. In Mungo Park's travels in the interior of Africa, he records that the Moors considered all so-called Negroes as being inferior and looked upon as a race of slaves. The Moors and the Fulas, being black, ranked themselves among the whites and were attributed honorary white status among Europeans. The U.S. Census Bureau declares all people originating in North Africa and the Middle East to be white. This is interesting considering the fact that the ancient Hebrews were often confused for and thought to be sons and daughters of Ham by Europeans. According to George Francis Dow, in his book Slave Ships and Slaving, it was the Moors who had told the Portuguese of the black-skinned people living in great numbers south of the Sahara Desert, and according to them, a race cursed of God and predestined as slaves. The Jews in the interior of Africa were hardly distinguishable from the Moors, who were mostly comprised of Canaanite tribes that had left ancient Canaan in waves during the Israelite era to resettle in North Africa. Among those Canaanite tribes were the people of Tsor, also known as Tyre, and the people of Sidon as mentioned in the 3rd chapter of the book of Yoel. The Philistia, also being joined with them, have been linked to the modern Tuaregs. The Moors, Berbers, and Tuaregs all played a role in the transatlantic slave trade and saw themselves as being of separate ethnic origins than the people living south of the Sahara Desert, whom they despised. It has been known since ancient times that the nation of Israel had colonies extending from their northeast African capital of Jerusalem far into the western and central parts of Africa. During the Roman era, there was a flood of Israelites into these parts of Africa trying to escape Roman persecution. Hostilities in the north of Africa drove these Israelite exiles to seek refuge below the Sahara, in the western, central, and southern parts of Africa. In Nathan Ashabel's Pictorial History of the Jewish People, on page 227, he records that in 1600, the famous geographer Leo Africanus wrote, "The Abyssinians claim that a numerous people of Jewish origin is found living on the shores of the Nile towards the west under a mighty king. Some of our newer geographers located an unknown mountainous region at the equator between the Congo and Abbasia, which they call the land of the Hebrews. Jews also live in an inaccessible place in the mountains in a northerly direction from the kingdom of Guame and south of the kingdom of Goron. They are powerful and independent." In the 3rd chapter, 6th verse of the book of Yoel, we read that the Canaanites from Tsor and Sidon, whom we have already identified with the Moors, sold the people of Yehuda and Jerusalem to the sons of Yawan. If you turn to the book of Bereshit in the 10th chapter, verses 1 through 5, it lists the sons of Yawan as Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, Dodanim. It also says that they form the coastland peoples. They also list it in the same order in the book of Jasher, chapter 7, verse 6. In the 10th chapter of Jasher, 13th verse, we find that the children of Yawan dwell in the land of Macedonia, and from there spread out. Verses 15 through 17 read as follows: "And the children of Elisha are the Almanim, and they also went and built themselves cities. These are cities situated between the mountains of Job and Shebathmo. And of them were the people of Lombardy, who dwell opposite the mountains of Job and Shebathmo. And they conquered the land of Italia and remain there to this day. The children of Kittim are the Romim, who dwell in the valley of Canopia by the river Tibereu. The children of Dodanim are those who dwell in the cities of the Sea of Gihon, in the land of Bordna." We can see now that the children of Yawan includes the Greeks and Italians. The Roman Empire was vast, covering the coastal lands of the entire Mediterranean Sea, stretching from Turkey to the Roman colony of Britannia. Following the narrative laid out in the Torah, in the books of Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 10, Yoel, Joel chapter 3, verses 1 through 8, Debarim, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 64 to 68, Bereshit, Genesis chapter 15, verse 12 to 14, Luke chapter 21, verses 20 to 24, Hazon, Revelation chapter 2, verse 9, and chapter 3, verse 9. We are left with a final summary. Living beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, the Hebrew exiles would be pursued, captured, and sold by the Moors into slavery to the Europeans. In ships they would be scattered throughout the world and into the lands of their slavery by a method which would never be repeated again in history. They would remain in the land of their captivity for 400 years. Meanwhile, their homeland would be trampled down and controlled by foreigners pretending to be them. This would mean that the Torah is not simply a book written by men, but that it shows evidence that it transcends the confines of space and time.